In early February, El Salvador's president, self-styled as the world's, quote, coolest dictator, agreed to take some of Trump's deportees and house them in El Salvador for a fee. The deal means American money is being spent to house detainees internationally in one of the most notorious and dangerous prison complexes in the world. The Trump administration is currently in court defending the lack of due process for these people. They're citing the Alien Enemies Act. It's likely to go to the Supreme Court. And I'm sure you remember an appellate judge who initially ordered the deportations to stop had this to say about the treatment of Venezuelan deportees.
There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act.
Her point is even gang members are entitled to due process. Photojournalist Phillip Holsinger watched on a tarmac in El Salvador while many of these detainees from America arrived in El Salvador. He described the transfer in Time magazine, where you can see some of his absolutely stunning photography as the crossing of an ancient continent. Phillip, it's a pleasure to have you, and congratulations on your work.
Thank you.
And when I first saw your pictures, I was absolutely horrified. So, tell us what you saw. Describe what you saw from the Venezuelans on the plane to coming down into the tarmac, and we'll get to the prison eventually. But tell us what you saw.
Well, I've been here for over a year working on this story, so I've experienced a lot of transfers, mostly inter-country transfers from prison. These are, convicted, sentenced, MS-13, Barrio 18 murderers. This is the first time that I had been with foreigners coming here. I think it was the first time foreigners had been shipped to El Salvador. And so I had a certain expectation, which I, wrote about. I expected a lot more tattoos, a lot more tough guys. And but when they came off the plane, and these guys had hard faces, but they clearly did not look like other gang members that I've been accustomed to in here and around the world. They had a sense of shock about them. They didn't know where they were. I was actually able to be on the plane, on two of the different planes as soon as they landed. So I was able to be with them from inside the plane all the way to inside their cells in Sakat.
Can you describe what for lack of a better expression, what the welcoming committee was like there on the tarmac, Phillip?
Well, there are different layers to this story. As the thing is complicated, at first sight for anybody, it looks dystopian. I mean, it's literally zero dark 30 when they start bringing them off the plane, and it feels like the movie. There are maybe 500 police officers, and I say police officers, but these are the elite. Some Jaguar, that's one of their elite services, in black riot gear. And then there's a contingency of soldiers as well, which create what they call fence around the whole place. So maybe 1,000 people that were involved just at the airport. And so it's very methodical, extremely well organized, but it heightens that sense of dystopia because everything is in order. The soldiers are lined up, the police are lined up, and this is not a quiet affair. I mean, this is a big affair.
And we should be clear, you said about 1,000 people in law enforcement and affiliated things, roughly 250 to 300 people coming off the planes, 240 of them roughly Venezuelans. How did you get access to the tarmac to begin with, Phillip? How were you able to be there?
So I've been here working on this story, and as you know, as journalists, you build trust, and I have a reputation of being just a straight person. I'm very much underground. I work very long on stories. They take me years to work on. So I've gotten to know the security apparatus well and the people. And they, there was a total media blackout. It was just a government team allowed to be there. So part of it is just field craft. It's, people, they're familiar with you. And, and so I went and then you kind of go until you're told not to go anymore. And I just kept walking, you know.
And got some incredible footage. By the way,
Incredible.
I think you mentioned in one of these pieces I read that soldiers and cops lined the whole 25-mile route to the prison. So was this special because they were coming from America and they were these Venezuelans under the Trump administration, or is this what they usually do?
No, this is standard operating procedure for the transfer of soldiers. And usually when there's an internal country transfer, it's in the realm of 2,000 inmates that'll be
Okay.
being moved. A lot of buses. The traffic, of course, you can imagine is I call it demented, but it's typical. It's so these transfers have to happen at night, and they have a very well-oiled methodology for it here. So part of that is just security, is that from the moment these inmates leave a prison to when they enter Sakat, everything is guarded. And but for the and that's why I sort of made note of that. The context of that and the timepiece was that for an El Salvadoran, they understand this, but for these Venezuelan guys, I can't say what they were thinking, but to be greeted by hundreds of military and police, and then to be taken across rural roads that are lined with floodlights and soldiers had to have appeared strange.
By the way, Sakat that Philip is mentioning is that Terrorism Confinement Center, the legendary prison there. Before you tell us, share a couple of stories about some of the men who were chained and taken to this prison. Can you describe why did the president of El Salvador cut this deal with Trump to do it? I know he's wildly popular there. I was going to say despite suspending a lot of civil liberties, but maybe because of the suspending a lot of civil liberties, which led to him reining in a lot of the gangs. But why did he cut the deal with Trump in your estimation, Philip?
So I'm sort of registering the layers of your question. Sort of the big picture is, the country before, and I've learned this over a year now, is I didn't expect it. And I've been in places, dangerous places all over the world. I didn't understand that the gangs had controlled the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
They did so with the murder protocol. That's given me nightmares.
What does that mean?
They have among their stations in MS-13, they have a role called, to be graphic, I apologize, but
okay.
They call them the master of dismemberment. And this person is essentially a murder surgeon. Their job is to, you can just figure the word, they're the master of dismemberment. And the gang members rule the country with the type of terror that everybody was locked down in their houses. It was really extraordinary. And so the measures to defeat the gang were based on that murderous background. I can't tell you the details of the deal with the United States. It's above my pay grade. I know what I've read. I do know that it's expensive for El Salvador to take care of prisoners, and maybe there was some economic trade in that it helps them to pay for their own incarceration. But that's sort of above my pay grade.
So tell us, before you get to the individual stories, just from what I saw, pictures of men in underwear with lots of tattoos, very close together in a small space, people's heads being shaved. I didn't know if that's what
Chained.
they normally, changed, hands and feet shackled around their waist. Again, is this what usually happens there, or was this a special deal for these Venezuelans?
So not to make light of anything, but and I spend a lot of time in these environments around the world, that the incarceration and the movement of incarcerated people, especially people who are deemed extremely dangerous, protocol in any prison, United States is usually like a 5-point shackle, which is hands and feet, and then chained together. So part of that is just so that a person can't move, can't rise up, can't, and then there are body postures, which are standard for moving a dangerous person from one space to another. Again, they're uncomfortable and painful. And so a lot of the things that you see are actually standard operating procedure in any, fair prison in the world. I think that there is an opportunity to abuse those positions, meaning bent bodies and chains, and to use those to, cause unusual pain. But at what you're seeing in general is sort of standard operating procedure. But there is definitely a sense of theater to it, which I wrote about, and part of it is, and again, to the stated purpose on the El Salvadoran side and similar prisons, not in the United States because this is not allowed in the U.S. The stated purpose is that they want to shock a person to not even thinking they can stand up. And one of the things that had happened that night was there were 3 planes, and I limited my time to what I'll call plane number 2 and plane number 1. That was the order of their landing. And plane number 2 was where only Venezuelans and 1 El Salvadoran were on. And I made that my main focus. And on plane number 2, the Venezuelans tried to overthrow the plane.
Yeah.
And that was according to Homeland Security, but I actually went on the plane. I was there at the tail end of it because somebody told me it was happening. So I literally ran through the soldiers and police and ran up the gangway and onto the plane. And so they gave instructions specifically based on that to say, make it harder on these guys and let them know they're not in control.
Okay.
Phillip was running onto the plane. I'd be running the other direction, I should say. That describes the difference right here. Phillip Holsinger, you can see and read his brilliant work around this landing in Time magazine. As you know, a number of families of these Venezuelans have said not only did they commit no crimes in the United States, they committed no crimes anywhere. They're not gang members. Some clearly are. Could you describe the situation with this guy who suggested, I'm a gay guy, I'm a barber, I have nothing to do with this? Describe that scene to us if you can, Phillip.
Well, again, the way that I do my work is very unusual, I think, today. But it's not unusual. I didn't study photography or journalism. I studied math. And my interest is in a raw fact, and my hero is W. Eugene Smith and the original Life magazine photo essayist. And I aim to bring a person into the moment. Mm-hmm. And what struck me about those claims, people claim innocence all the time. Sure. In incarceration. You learn, or I've learned, that there are different sounds that people make when they're in a bad situation. And I've said, to quote myself, there's a difference between a whimper and a growl. And many of these gang members growl. And this one guy caught my attention because it didn't correlate with this situation. If somebody is treating you harshly and manhandling you and pushing you down in that environment, I don't think that I would make up a story that I'm a gay barber or a gay stylist as my means of argument to try to persuade this person not to hit me. So that struck me, and it doesn't mean he's innocent, but it struck me as something I wanted to record. You can't record that on your camera. So I had to write what I heard because, it begs investigation. And I believe the El Salvadorans have actually made it a priority to find out, if they've received people that maybe weren't vetted as fully as they expected. In El Salvador, the crackdown, as you noted, is wildly popular. And what's astounded me is that even family members of many of the gang members incarcerated say they love the president because they're safe. It's strange. But when they began to arrest El Salvadoran gang members, they had collected 76,000 files. They had deep information on their crimes. And I think when the planes landed, I think the El Salvadorans, I can't speak for them, but I think they were a little surprised that files didn't come with these guys. They just received 3 manila folders, one from each plane with, some basic papers for each of the guys.
Well, Donald Trump has said there was, quote, very strong vetting. News reports subsequently have said the vetting was not very strong
Well,
wall.
I don't know obviously if this is true, but Mother Jones has reported that people that have talked with the families and lawyers for the families, they claim that of 10 men detained in El Salvador, they claim that they had no connection to these gangs, but they had a lot of tattoos, and that's how they wound up in this situation. I have no idea if that's true, but that's obviously a concern that you could be just rounded up and sent off
Yeah,
to
and
this.
I think that's definitely a possibility on the U.S. side. Another interesting thing about El Salvador is that they actually have created a lexicon of tattoos that's being used by intelligence agencies in different parts of the world to identify Bio 18, MS-13, but operate here. And so on the El Salvadoran side, there's sort of I've heard people say, even when the Homeland Security guy said, one of the guys didn't want to get on the plane because he has tattoos, meaning an American operator.
Oh,
And I said, well, that's
Oh
not
God.
true that many people here have tattoos. The El Salvadoran police and intelligence services actually know the difference between a gang tattoo but I'm not sure the same processes in the U.S. And I'll tell you this, that the Tren de Agua are not tattooed like MS-13 and Barrio 18. I mean, maybe some are, but I think they learned that you can't tattoo your face and give it all away. So most of the guys coming off the plane had very few tattoos. When I say few, in comparison to,
Understood. Philip, could you
the
describe this? You've been in this prison that is legendary around the world where these men were taken, again, called the Terrorism Confinement Center. Could you describe what the conditions inside that prison?
Yeah, there's a two sides to it, which, depending on who's listening to you, maybe they'll think I'm sympathetic one way or the other. But the facts are that I have never seen a prison so clean and orderly. But it is so because by design, it's almost total austerity. So the whole philosophy of the construction of the prison and its management is that the inmates have virtually no contact with anybody.
oh,
So they're in each block has, I forget the exact number of cells, but they have cells that hold 80 people. So around 2,000 people could be in a cell block. But within that cell of 80 people, there are no amenities. They they leave the cell for 30 minutes a day, only to stand in front of the cell and do exercise and maybe have a religious service. And that's it. They're not allowed to speak. If they're speaking with each other, they have to talk in low tones. There's zero tolerance for disobedience, which begs the question, how is that obedience maintained? And I think it's maintained through the threat of a consequence, which is definitely it's solitary confinement. They have that, but probably also, getting slapped. And this is just me telling you what I've, observed there. But it's when you walk in, I've never seen anything like it. The guards, nobody is abused. There's never been a murder in Sakat. Uh, they they have guards that look above, look in front, and there's video surveillance 24 hours and the lights never go off. They dim at night. So it's total austerity. They have no contact to the outside world. That's part of the accusations against Sakat, is that with no amenities, no ability to communicate with the outside world, all legal interactions are done via, video from a room inside that block. They never leave the block. There are no life sentences or capital punishment in El Salvador, but their workaround is to have multiple, 90-year sentences. And so these guys will never, the MS-13 and Barrio 18 guys will never leave this prison alive.
You've interviewed people in there. Am I not right about that? Have you?
Correct.
Why
Yeah.
have they allowed you to do that?
It's the access. I mean, when I came and I interacted with the government early on, they knew my reputation for, deep, slow reporting, and my ask was, if it's really good, if it's not a police state, if you're not abusing people, then give me access. And they did. So I've
Wow.
moved freely in and out of homicide units, intelligence, military. It's in a way you might call it reckless on their part, because I don't do favors. And so I've been able to read the files, and that's where the nightmares came. I mean, I get a little emotional because the people of El Salvador are the kindest people I've ever met in the world. I know people say that about foreign countries, but I've never experienced anything like this country. And it makes no sense because of what this country has suffered. People should be bitter and seeking vengeance. And this country is so beautiful, and people have astounded me. But I've heard their stories, and my God, the horror stories. I mean, these gang members would walk into an elementary school and grab a girl and rape her in front of the school.
Oh,
And it was a horror movie, this country. And that's the context of the war on gangs and what has happened here. But the access has been, it doesn't make any sense to me, but that's why I've had the access.
Well, we're fortunate that you did, particularly on that tarmac and on those planes. The reporting and the photography was spectacular, and we thank you for sharing it with us and talking to us, Philip. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
yeah, and you can see all the
Boston,
photos.
Phillip.
Oh, what'd you say?
I miss Boston.
Oh,
Anytime.
anytime. We'd love to talk to you in
Boothby
person.
Harbor is my stomping ground. Boothby Harbor.
Come say hi.
And we can see all your photographs at time.com, right?
Yeah.
Correct? Time
Yes,
Magazine. Thank you so much for being
Be
with
well.
us, and
Thank
thank
you.
you very much for
Thank you.
your work. We much appreciate it.